Hi, my name is Edwin. In this talk, I'm going to present a testing and containment mechanism that can allow us to protect the health and livelihoods of communities in Mexico that have been hardest hit by the pandemic. This is joint work with collaborators based in the UK, Italy, and Mexico. The current COVID-19 outbreak has shown us that most countries are unprepared to deal with a global pandemic. In a world with unlimited resources and no logistical constraints, we could simply test the entire population at once and quarantine everyone who is infected. But in practice, resources are limited on many fronts. This includes PPE, hospital beds, the extent to which governments can reimburse salaries of furloughed employees, and of course the daily number of tests that a country can perform. Our project focuses on making the most of limited testing resources in Mexico, which only has the capacity to test 9,000 people per day. This corresponds to 72 people per million. And these testing capacities are concentrated mainly in urban areas. As a result, rural communities are especially hit by these testing shortages. We are in conversation with policymakers in 2 states in Mexico in order to determine efficient methods to use existing testing resources. Many countries responded to the first wave of COVID-19 by implementing a lockdown. This is effective at curbing the spread of the virus, but has a significant impact on the well-being of society and the economy. Other strategies like track and trace avoid these pitfalls, but are inherently more complex to execute successfully, especially in countries without the necessary pre-existing infrastructure. Instead, simple mechanisms that make better use of existing resources can be used to achieve 2 key objectives: minimizing the spread of the virus and minimizing the impact on society and the economy. Since testing resources are limited, we approach the problem of designing a mechanism as a resource allocation problem. A powerful way to expand the reach of a limited number of tests is group testing. In group testing, samples from multiple people are pooled together and tested as one. If the test is negative, we know that all people in the group are healthy. Otherwise, we know that at least one person in the group is infected. Group A on the left-hand side contains only healthy individuals, while Group B on the right-hand side contains 3 infected individuals. Group testing has been used extensively in the fight against HIV. It provides a cheap way to rule out infections in a large population. The maximum number of samples that can be pooled and tested as one is limited by the sensitivity of the underlying qPCR testing methodology. In practice, this restricts group sizes for COVID-19 testing to no more than 32. Group testing has been recognized by multiple states as a valuable tool in the COVID-19 pandemic, and is most notably used in Ghana to great effect. What Nebraska, Germany, India, and Ghana all have in common is that they implement a group testing strategy originally designed by Robert Dorfman in 1943. Dorfman's procedure works in 2 stages. In the first stage, we partition the population into groups of some fixed size G and perform group tests on these groups. The second stage then individually tests everyone who is part of a positive group. If the infection rate among the population is known, the group size that theoretically minimizes the expected total number of tests required is given by the square root of n over k. In practice, decision makers often opt for smaller group sizes, with Nebraska testing in groups of 5 and Ghana in groups of 10. Dorfman's procedure reduces the number of tests required to identify infected individuals, but not by enough to test the entire population. Testing capacities are simply too limited in practice. Moreover, not testing a large segment of the population presents an opportunity cost in terms of viral spread and societal impact. In other words, it becomes crucial to decide who to test. Testing strategies should prioritize testing vulnerable population segments, as they incur higher costs in terms of death rates and hospitalization. We should also focus on testing people who are likely to spread the virus, as they infect many other people if they are not caught. Finally, there are certain key workers such as the police, the fire brigade, electrical grid engineers, and perhaps politicians who are indispensable to the running of countries and should be protected by performing regular testing. So far, we have considered testing mechanisms that provide us a diagnosis of every tested person at an individual level. We know for every tested person whether they are infected or not. But in countries such as Mexico, where testing capacities are severely limited, we can make better use of our testing resources by letting go of testing down to the individual level. Instead, we still test people in groups, but don't test people in positive groups individually. In other words, we are only performing the first stage of Dorfman's procedure. While this leads to an individual level loss of information, we actually increase the population level benefits. To illustrate this, consider a village with 30 marketplace workers and 3 available tests. The workers are in daily contact with many customers and are thus at high risk of spreading the virus if infected. However, we assume that only 2 marketplace workers are currently infected. What is the best way to allocate 3 available tests? If we test 3 workers individually, 27 workers go untested and may become super spreaders. On the other hand, if we test all 30 workers together in one test and this test isn't positive, we have no idea of identifying who is infected and we only have 2 more tests available. At best, we now have to quarantine 28 marketplace workers who are essential to the running of the village. As a compromise, we might test the workers in 3 groups of 10 and quarantine the groups that test positive. This guarantees that no infectious workers can spread disease. Moreover, as only 2 workers are infected, at least one group is not quarantined and can continue to sell vital supplies to the village. The resource optimal mechanism we propose maximizes the benefits from any fixed testing budget. We measure these benefits in terms of 2 objectives, limiting the spread of the virus and minimizing the impact on the economy. Exploiting the heterogeneity of the population, our mechanism decides who to test and at what group size. Importantly, the benefits of any testing strategy can only be measured if it is coupled with a containment policy that is informed by the test results. The containment policy we suggest is simple and can be implemented in practice with minimal logistics. Our application can be used to exit a lockdown, and it can also provide a systematic way of monitoring populations to prevent a second wave of the pandemic. Moreover, our approach can be applied both at the state level and in smaller settings such as schools, universities, care homes, and refugee camps. Suppose we have T available tests per week. Every week, we repeat the following 3 steps. First, we partition the population into categories. Then, we solve an optimization problem in order to decide how to allocate the T available tests to these categories. We also decide on the size of the group tests for each category. Thirdly, we then perform these group tests on disjoint groups that are chosen uniformly at random in each category. Finally, our containment policy is simple. Whenever a group tests positive, we quarantine everyone in the group. If a group is negative, we allow everyone to resume their social and economic activities. Let's take a detailed look at the first 2 steps of the mechanism. In the first step, we partition the population into categories according to information about people's exposure to the virus and their cost of containment. The exposure of the virus indicates a person's likelihood of getting infected and, conversely, infecting others if they're infectious themselves. The cost of containment, on the other hand, indicates how costly it is for the person to self-isolate. This includes the cost to society and the mental and physical cost to the individual themselves. Other criteria, such as geographical location, may also be considered when partitioning the population. Importantly, we don't need fine-grained information about exposure and the cost of containment in order to partition the population successfully. In Mexico, for instance, we have access to this data through the symptom tracking app deployed in the state of San Luis Potosí. To illustrate the wealth of data available through the existing symptom tracking app, we take a quick look at maps generated by its web portal. This map shows the responses in the capital city of San Luis Potosí. The data from the app is also used to generate a risk map that predicts infection rates in each district of the city on a daily basis. Here we show 3 maps that show estimates for the 28th, 29th, and 30th of April. This data allows us to accurately estimate where new cases are most likely to occur. Now let's take a closer look at the optimization problem we solved to find an optimal allocation of the testing budget to the segments. In order to set up the optimization problem, we define the following parameters for each segment. For each category CI, we assume that everyone in the category is infected with probability PI. We can obtain accurate estimates of PI from the symptom tracking app, as shown in the image on the right. Moreover, eta I is the average exposure and gamma I is the average cost of containment for a person in the category. In order to motivate the objective function, we consider the following rule of thumb. Recall that our containment policy is to quarantine all groups that test positive. Whenever we have individuals with a high cost of containment, for example doctors, we want to test them in small groups in order to avoid many people quarantining unnecessarily. On the other hand, we want to minimize the number of people with high exposure that go untested, as they might cause many new infections. As a result, we either test these people with large group sizes or allocate more tests to such categories. Guided by this intuition, we set up our objective function that balances our 2 objectives. Let's consider objective 1 first. In order to minimize the spread of the virus, our goal is to minimize the number of infected but untested people, as these are the only source of new infections. We determine the expected number of such people in each category as shown, assuming that we perform TI tests at group size GI and weight this term with the exposure parameter eta I of the category. This gives the expected number of new infections caused by infected but untested people. Summing over all categories yields objective 1. In order to minimize the impact on the economy, we consider the number of people that are healthy but quarantining because they tested positive in a group test. For every category, the expected number of people is given by the expression shown, and similarly to the first objective, we weight this term by gamma I and sum over all categories to obtain objective 2. In practice, policymakers may want to prioritize one objective over the other. In this case, we can take the convex combination of the two objectives. We briefly mentioned the constraints of the optimization problem. Firstly, we cannot allocate more than t-tests. Secondly, group sizes should lie between 1 and 32. Thirdly, we shouldn't allocate more tests to a category than can be used at that group size. Fourthly, the number of tests and group sizes should be integral. Solving this optimization problem efficiently is non-trivial as the objective function is not convex. The variables are highlighted in red. However, if we fix group sizes, the remaining problem is an integer linear program that we can solve efficiently. This suggests a simple approach where we try every single combination of group sizes and compute the optimal allocation for these. This is computationally feasible if the number of categories and possible group sizes is small. Moreover, as the objective is separable, a more careful approach may lead to a faster algorithm. To verify the efficacy of our testing and containment mechanism, we developed a simple graph-based SIR model on a heterogeneous population that was augmented to allow individuals to quarantine. We identified the exposure parameter of an individual with the degree of the individual's node in the social graph. In order to simulate a scenario that mimics a typical Mexican village with a population of 10,000, we generated a random geometric graph with 9,500 nodes that represent the general population. This graph was then augmented with 20 healthcare workers with high connectivity and 480 marketplace workers with medium connectivity. We also assumed that the general population has a low cost of containment, while both healthcare and marketplace workers have a similar high cost of containment. In accordance with Mexico's current testing capacities, we assumed a testing budget of 1 test per week. This simulation was then run for 2,000 discrete time steps, which corresponds to 200 days. This plot shows the result of our simulations. As you can see on the left, the number of infected people at the peak was 27% lower when our strategy was implemented, compared to the baseline strategies of randomly allocating a single group test each day or doing nothing at all. As you can see on the right-hand side, this was achieved while requiring no more than 2% of the population to self-isolate at any given point in time. There are some remaining practical challenges that should be solved before our mechanism can be applied in practice. Firstly, we should focus on conceptually simple and implementable methods to fine-tune our techniques to segment the population. This ties into the next points of ensuring incentive compatibility, privacy guarantees, and acceptance of the model among the population that we are testing. Another aspect is that group tests in practice are not perfect, but return false negatives with a certain probability that is inversely proportional to the group size. More generally, qPCR testing does not only give a binary answer, but provides extra information in the form of bounds on the viral load in the pooled sample. Bayesian analysis on this information can lead to increased efficiencies in our testing mechanisms. Most importantly, more work is needed to adapt our mechanisms to realities on the ground. We are talking to policymakers with the aim of having our mechanism in place before a second wave of infections hits. Thanks for attending my talk. If you have any questions or ideas about our approach, feel free to get in touch or visit our website.